What if the magnets inside every EV, every wind turbine, every piece of defense hardware India builds could be cut off overnight? That is not a hypothetical. And India just decided it is done gambling on that risk. On March 20th, 2026, the Indian government launched a 7,280 crore rupee scheme to build 5 domestic factories making sintered NdFeB magnets. That is the full name for those insanely powerful permanent magnets you find in EV motors, wind turbines, and defense systems. The scheme is split into 2 buckets: 750 crore rupees upfront as capital subsidy to actually get factories built, and 6,450 crore rupees in sales-linked incentives paid out over 5 years as companies start selling. Think of it as the government saying, "We will help you set up the kitchen and then reward you every time a dish goes out the door." The target is 6,000 tons of magnets per year across 5 plants by 2028, with bidding closing May 28, 2026. Now here is the part that really puts this in context. India has the raw rare earth ore sitting right here in the ground. But for years we have been shipping those ingredients to China, letting them do all the processing, and then buying the finished product back at a premium. How much of a premium? Right now, India imports up to 90.4% of its magnets by quantity. The vast majority from China. In FY2 025 alone, that was 53,700 tons coming in from outside. And China does not just dominate our supply. They control roughly 90% of global rare earth processing. They basically own the oven in this kitchen. If they restrict exports tomorrow, and given current geopolitical tensions, that is absolutely on the table. India's EV boom, renewable energy push, and defense supply chain all hit a wall at the same time. Domestic demand for these magnets is already around 4,000 to 5,000 tons a year and is expected to cross 8,200 tons by 2030. So this scheme is not just industrial policy on paper. It is India trying to build its own ovens before someone else decides to turn theirs off. So that is the big picture. What was launched, and why it is a much bigger deal than a typical government tender. But who actually gets to bid for this? And what does it take to qualify? That is exactly what we are getting into next. So the policy exists. But who actually wins here? Who takes the hit? And what does it cost right now? Let's get into it. The biggest winner, arguably, is IRL, India Rare Earths Limited, the country's only domestic miner of rare earth ores. Under this scheme, the 3 lowest bidders get assured supply of NdPr oxide directly from IRL. That is a guaranteed bulk buyer for a public sector company that was basically selling into thin air before. Think of it as a farmer finally getting a confirmed supermarket contract instead of hoping someone shows up at the market. EV makers and renewable energy companies win too. Tata Motors, Mahindra, Suzlon. They're all currently hooked on imported magnets. A domestic supply chain means price predictability and real insulation if China ever tightens its export tap. And the factory bidders? They get access to 7,280 crore rupees in government incentives to build something genuinely strategic. That is a compelling pitch. But here is the honest part. Domestic magnets are expected to run 20 to 30% more expensive than Chinese imports, at least early on. So if you are a manufacturer buying cheap imports right now, your input costs are going up in the short term. The government is essentially handing out a discount coupon, about 2,150 rupees per kilogram, to make local sourcing price competitive. And if you look at the trend line on domestic magnet production capacity, it is a steep upward curve that only holds if 5 plants actually get built in 2 years with near zero existing infrastructure. Aggressive? Absolutely. India has been here before. The question, as always, is execution. So the scheme is live, the incentives are real. But what do you actually watch for to know if this works? Let's get into that. Mark May 28th, 2026 in your calendar. That's the bidding deadline, and it's basically a live confidence vote on this entire program. If names like Tata or Adani show up in that bidder list, that tells you the private sector actually believes the economics work. If it's only smaller players or foreign entrants, execution credibility takes a serious hit. Then comes the real test. 6,000 tons per year by 2028. Here's why that number matters. Right now, India consumes 4,000 to 5,000 tons of rare earth magnets annually, and that figure is climbing fast. Pull up this comparison graphic. By 2030, projected demand crosses 8,200 tons. If these 5 plants hit their targets, India goes from 90% import dependence to something close to self-sufficient in under 5 years. That is not a small thing. For EV and renewable businesses, yes. There's probably a 2 to 3 year window where domestic magnets cost more than Chinese ones. That's the awkward middle phase. But the long-term payoff: supply security, no sudden China shock disruptions, and competitive pricing once plants scale. That's absolutely worth planning around right now. Start building supplier relationships before the market tightens, not after. For investors and entrepreneurs, the government has essentially de-risked entry here with 7,280 crore rupees in incentives. The global rare earth magnet market is booming, and India is far from the only country desperate to source outside China. The opportunity window is real. Bottom line, India is finally converting its raw rare earth wealth into finished high-value products. The timeline is tight, the execution risks are genuine, but the strategic direction is unambiguous. The question was never whether India needs this. It absolutely does. The question is whether the ambition survives contact with reality, and that answer starts on May 28th. Follow us for more updates like this. Thanks for watching. And don't forget to follow us on YouTube, Instagram, and X.